Gentlemen, good to be with you today. This is a presentation that I gave to the NMRA Michiana division 10 years ago when I was working in marketing and sales at South Shore. So I've updated it just a little bit, but as I explained when I first gave this presentation in Elkhart all those years ago, what I want to do is basically there's not going to be a lot of pictures of trains here. This is mostly focused on the commercial side, the industries that generate the traffic, and it's really a snapshot of the line in 2011. Some things have changed. I put in some slides showing some of the new industries and things like that, but it's really a description that's kind of been sterilized, if you will, because I knew a lot about these companies and where they got their products. So I tried to make, especially the chemical industries, only publicly available information was in the presentation. I didn't want to give any information that I thought those industries would have been really sensitive to. So just kind of keep that in mind as we go forward. But this is a picture of a train. Again, like I said, if the Arnold that's on this call is Arnold Niederer, he's actually in this picture, in this locomotive of a train shoving into Kingsbury on the old Wabash down at the end of the Kingsbury Industrial Lead. So this is a new slide in this. This is my background. I'm in all these pictures. So I currently work for a company called Trevero that owns the Cedar Rapids and Iowa City Railway. Going in reverse order and kind of counterclockwise. Before that, I worked for the Iowa Interstate in business development. I'm in the middle window of that passenger train there. Before that, I was the vice president of marketing and sales for Watco, covering their Wisconsin and Southern Railroad. That picture there in the upper right was the first run on a newly rehabilitated line to Plymouth, Wisconsin that we had put back in service back when I worked there. Then before that, my job that brought this presentation up was working for South Shore Freight. Started there as the manager of growth initiatives, basically doing new business development, working with companies that had never worked with us before, or in a lot of cases had never done rail. And then was promoted to director of marketing and sales when I took over all the commercial functions for our traffic for everything that didn't include coal. So that's a picture of me in our Burnham yard working as a trainman, which I had the wonderful opportunity to do about 50 or 60 times during my 6.5 years with South Shore. And originally it started because I didn't really know the operational side of railroading. So I wanted to get out there and learn it. And it just became something that I really enjoyed doing. It gave me a chance to really see what the railroad did on a day-to-day basis, understand all those commercial agreements that I was negotiating with our customers, setting rates, things of that nature. It was just a fantastic opportunity. And really at South Shore, we were a company of about 60 people and knew everybody on a first name basis, all the trainmen. It was a fantastic company. It really was a great family. So it was a great opportunity to start the railroading business. And there in the upper left, that's me in a Conrail, I think Jeep 40. That was my first cab ride when I was going to school in Muncie, Indiana. Me and my buddy Brian Marsh, who his dad had started Overland Models. We did a lot of train watching when I was in college, and that's me in the cab getting my first cab ride from Muncie to the east after we'd helped a crew do some repairs on their train when an airline broke. So getting started, this was our standard map when I was at South Shore, and I'll be honest, I'm going to use pronouns a lot. We and us is going to mean the company, South Shore. I'm not there anymore, but I'm still going to use those pronouns as I go through this. So obviously, the main line between Chicago and South Bend, passenger service operated by NICD, South Shore Freight having an exclusive freight rights to those lines, and then the freight only line from Michigan City down to Kingsbury. In a way, this was, when I first gave this presentation, it was how do you model the South Shore without modeling catenary wires? So this is the line where you can model South Shore Freight without those pesky wires overhead. So this is a little overview map of the Kingsbury Industrial Lead. So this is the former nickel plate, most of it, from Michigan City down to Dillon. And then the east-west part there at the bottom was the old Wabash 4th District. And then once you get inside the Kingsbury, former Kingsbury Ordnance Plant, that's all privately owned track. But this is basically the overview. We're going to start in Michigan City, work our way out. So we're going to start with the largest industry on the line, GAF Materials, the shingle plant there, then talk about some of the others as we move south. You can see all those kind of the each individual point that I'm really going to hit on here, and I'll wrap up with this line again. But yeah, this is basically where we're going, a little freight journey in Laporte County. So to start off, this is Carroll Avenue Yard. The South Shore and Nick D's shops are just out of this image to the right. The main line is there at the bottom of the image, Chicago to the left, South Bend to the right. This is the former nickel plate yard in Michigan City where they interchanged with the South Shore. And this is the serving yard for basically everything in Michigan City from this point east, both on the Nick D main line and on the Kingsbury Industrial Lead. So in this view, there's a lot of cars in here for GAF.
I thought it was 10:30, it's 10 o'clock.
Hi, Bill, we can hear you if, yep, thank you. So there's a lot of cars in here, granule cars going into GAF. Looks like probably a couple of asphalt cars, tank cars, and then a covered coil car that's going down to roll coater. But this was basically the yard where all these jobs, traffic would be staged and brought in from the interchanges to the west. This is a bigger overview showing Michigan City. This was a South Shore Railroad aerial photos that we had flown right about the time that I started. So Carroll Avenue, the yard that we were just looking at, is in the very upper left corner. South Shore Freight's rip tracks are, the storage there is just immediately to the right of Carroll Ave Yard. South Shore Freight shops are there where the locomotives and freight cars are maintained. Then under the Risky Avenue Bridge, then you've got the Nick D shops on the right side. So what was South Shore's office, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but was in this little building right here on Risky Avenue. When I worked there, we were back in the old office, just on the other side of the tracks from the shops. And so the biggest industry here on the line is what's in the foreground, and that's GAF Materials. It had been built as Stefco Steel, a manufacturer of prefab metal buildings. And I don't remember exactly when GAF moved into this plant, but they took it over, and it was really fully integrated shingle manufacturing. So they started off with asphalt, paper, and granules, kicked out shingles, which we'll get some close-up views of the plant. So it was a great industry. When I first started there, everything was inbound. They were not shipping any outbound shingles by rail. They were bringing some in because each of their factories also was a distribution warehouse. So they would get some shingles that they didn't manufacture in Michigan City. They would get those from other plants. They would get them shipped in. They would distribute them from truck, but they weren't doing anything outbound on the shingle side. And we put in a program to capture some of that business working with CN. So here's a view of the plant from the west. As you look at the plant, the Kingsbury Industrial Lead main line is there on the bottom right. When the plant was converted to the shingle manufacturer, they actually took over a small portion of the main line. The main line was bumped out around the lead so that a switch could get put in and geometry could get into those 4 tracks there, have switches put in so that they could get 4 tracks into the granule loading rack. Looking at the plant, I still never understood why we had to do that, but that's the way it works. So we switched the plant on the inbound side, all these tracks at Risky Avenue. So as you go into the plant, under that covered unloading area, there were 4 pockets, 1 on each track, where granules could be unloaded from covered hoppers and go into the plant. And they really had very little storage capacity for roofing granules. So really we were spotting the cars in for the colors of shingles that they were manufacturing on any given day. So they would request specific cars that were located in Carroll Avenue. The crew would sort those cars out, come over, run around the cars, and shove them into the plant. And that was basically what was going to be made in the next day or two in the plant. So very intensive service. We were giving them a granule shift probably most days of the week. And then depending on things, an asphalt shift or asphalt switch, maybe once a week, sometimes twice a week, because they had to put the cars on steam. A lot of the asphalt that they were bringing into the plant was trucked in. We fought that for a long time, but the roofing granules were coming in from a GAF plant in Kremlin, Wisconsin. So that was located on the Wisconsin Central, later CN. Almost all those granules came in Wisconsin Central or GACX twin hoppers. The most of the rail asphalt was coming from Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. So they had some closer origins for asphalt that they trucked in. But here you get a pretty good overview of the plant. At the top is the steam table. Like I said, the granule unloading facility there in the bottom right. And what you see on the far left along the main line, there's some asphalt cars stored in there, but that was the shingle dock. So that's where shingles would be shipped or received by rail. At the time that this picture was taken, weren't doing anything by rail, so they were storing inbound asphalt cars there. Similar time period. And I'll just say most of the aerial images of this were taken from Google Maps back in 2011. So that's a lot of what we'll be looking at today. But yeah, the asphalt steam heat plant on the far right, which could hold 10 cars, and then the granule tracks in the foreground. And this is a more modern Google Earth shot. Google has changed some things, so they're trying to get everything three-dimensional, but it looks very similar if you go back and forth. Similar number of granule cars, similar number of asphalt cars in there. So not much has changed over the years. This is a little close-up of where the granule tracks were. You can see they've got at the far end of that little string of granule cars, GAF has a trackmobile in there that they will move the cars and index them themselves. They will ask for cars to specific tracks and pockets. Again, a pretty intensive switch because they want specific cars, they want them on specific places, basically set up for their production queue. So South Shore crews did a great job getting them switched almost every day, like I said. Asphalt tracks in the back, the steam table. You can see where each of those U's are in the piping. That's a car spot, 3 on the near track, and I think 6 or 7 on the far track, and then some room on both sides. And then the asphalt tanks are there where they would store the asphalt. But again, they would put steam on those cars, get the asphalt to flow, and then pump it out. Here you can see 3 or 4 asphalt trucks that are there. We were always fighting those folks. Dillon Transportation. They brought in a lot of asphalt from some locations in Chicago. And this is the dock. So this is a later Google Earth image showing box cars on the dock waiting to be loaded with shingles. So we had worked with CN, like I mentioned, we weren't doing any outbound shingles with GAF. Worked with them on a program that primarily went to Eastern Canada to big box retailers. So GAF would produce those shingles. We'd get box cars from CN because we didn't have box cars of our own at South Shore. And these would all go out in these big F box and T box, high cube, 50 and 60 foot cars. So moving down the line to the next customer, this is just on the east side of Michigan City. Online Packaging, as this snapshot from their website shows, they basically make household bleach. So it's a bleach plant. They bring in chlorine, they bring in plastic pellets, they blow their own bottles, dilute the bleach, the chlorine down into bleach, and sell it to local retailers. This is an overhead view of the plant that South Shore serves. So in the upper right, you'd be going towards Michigan City, lower left going towards Kingsbury. Plant was pretty simple, mostly truck docks inside the plant. Basically, they're bringing in plastic pellets, they're making bottles, they're bringing the chlorine in, making the bleach, bottling that, and sending it out on pallets. Pretty simple operation. Here you can see a couple of covered hoppers, plastic pellets waiting to go in. Here's from the other direction, and then an inset is the more modern picture of the plant. But you can see they've got a chlorine car spot there. It was basically just a manway that came out of the side of the building. Pretty simple operation. There was a little fence there to keep the tank cars secure. So they had an off spot inside the fence, and then the car that was on spot. In the image in the bottom right, you can see both. They've got a car off spot and a car at the unloading rack. Then the plastic pellets cars, really you just had hoses that were there that they would pull those pellets off into those tanks that you can see. Only 3 or 4 of them in the 2011 image, and then they had built some more storage by the more recent image, which is just a couple years old there. So Online Packaging, neat little operation, but very simple plant. Here's some ground level views that I took, showing the blue flag protection there, the mainline switch, the storage tanks there. Neat little detail is the windsock. Anybody that's doing TIH, toxic inhalation hazard traffic, has to have one of those up for emergency responders, so you can see which way the wind's blowing in the event of a spill or release. You can see a tank car is kind of in the background there in that bottom left image. So that's on-line packaging from the ground level. Moving south, we go, this is on the north side of Laporte. So this is a place that the railroad called Belfast. If you look in the main image, you can see Belfast was originally the interchange point between the Père Marquette and the Nickel Plate. A lot of overhead traffic was interchanged here. You can just see the Père Marquette, which is long gone in this image, in the tree line there. They crossed at a diamond, and then there were interchange tracks down here where this transload facility would eventually be built. You know, that was long gone. I think that was probably the Penn Central merger got rid of that interchange point. But a lot of car ferry traffic that came up on the Nickel Plate went to the Père Marquette at this interchange to go north and then go across the lakes and avoid Chicago. But when I was there, this was a transload facility that we helped develop with a local industry that they called themselves Belfast Transload. And really a neat operation that I worked really closely with to grow business over the years. But there's a tuck-in picture here. So Hickman Williams, the picture in the upper right is a modern image. Those tracks weren't built when I left South Shore in 2014. But in the bottom of the main image, that's that same building. So the plant had been built as IMM. They were building, or it was a new startup. They never really got going well. There were plans to build a railroad spur in there. South Shore actually built the mainline switch that was never connected to track that was built inside the building. Eventually, they shut down, went bankrupt. The building sat vacant almost my entire time at South Shore with railroad track in the building and a mainline switch. The two never should meet. But after I left, Hickman Williams came in, built the tracks that you see here. South Shore put the switch back in after it had been removed right before I left. So a couple years later, and they built those tracks. Hickman Williams, you can see their website there, hicwilco.com. They manufacture and distribute additives for the steelmaking industry. So they're bringing in minerals that is used in the steelmaking industry along the lake. But what primarily we're going to talk about here today is the transload operation, which is in the upper left of that image. So this is a modern view of it. Basically, it was established for plastics resin transload. So there was powdered plastic and plastic pellet that was brought in. A trucking company worked with Belfast Transload to set this up as an operation. Instead of trucking plastic in from all the producers, they would have it railed in. Some of these cars would sit sometimes for a month, sometimes for 2 months. And a truck would come in, pull a load off at a time, about 4 truckloads per rail car in the plastic resin world. So sometimes a small volume user would only use a car a month. Those cars could sit for a long time. But we worked with Belfast Transload. They were also a railroad construction contractor. So they got into a lot of different things over the years. And one of those was a company down at Kingsbury that brought in and bagged landscape rock. So you can see 2 cars in the very center of the image. There's a pit that I'll show a picture of later. But they were bringing in white quartzite from Florida on the CSX, bringing that landscape rock in open top ballast hoppers, dumping it out into a gravity dump, and then bringing it down to their facility in Kingsbury, where they would bag it and sell it at retailers. So kind of a neat operation. You don't think of landscape rock moving by rail, but that was a fun one. So then the tank cars that you see in the right side of this image, I think this was taken right about 2014, right about the time I left South Shore. But it had only been the plastic resin on the tracks along the main line at the top. They were able to build some tracks to capture some liquid plasticizer business. So everywhere that the plastic resin in solid form goes, you're also using the liquid plasticizer as well. And the volumes were a lot higher. We really wanted to capture that business. Eventually, we figured out a way to do it. Belfast Transload put some tracks in. So those tank cars of liquid plasticizer would come in, get transloaded into trucks, and go to those same industries that were using the plastic pellets that the primary reason that this transload facility had been put in was going to. So these are some images that I took. You want to test your vertigo, stand up on top of a covered hopper. Boy, it is an interesting experience. But anyway, this was our South Shore freight job, switching the plastics tracks at Belfast Transload. You can see there in the gap in the covered hoppers there, that's the dump pit that we use for transloading the landscape rock. But here the crew has got their caboose because it's winter time. They would use that caboose as a shoving platform. In the winter, in the summer months, they would usually just ride the last car. But here's the crew working off the main line. And this industry was always switched on the way back. It was trailing point for the return move. So they go down to Kingsbury, run around their train at Dillon, and they would work this on the way back north. This is just a shot facing the other direction as the train was getting ready to head out. I don't think I was riding that job that day, so I think they left without me. But you can see the switches there coming off the runaround track. The switches for the liquid plasticizer tracks would come off a little farther north of that when eventually they were built. But where the grass is there in the upper right, that's where those tracks got put in for the tank cars. This is the dump pit I mentioned. Again, something that I believe this was all kind of cobbled together by Belfast Transload, but they had an idea to bring in railroad ballast. That didn't exactly work out, but they did end up capturing some of that landscape rock movement. What I don't know is if that business continued after I left, because that was a very low margin business. You know, landscape rock, when you're selling it at, you know, $7 or $8 a bag for landscape rock, there's just not a lot of money in there to transport it, buy it in Florida, transport it by rail all the way up here and distribute it. But it was a nice little piece of business while we had it. So continuing down south, this is an industry that was never active when I was at South Shore, but New York blower had been an active industry when South Shore first took this line over and bought it from Norfolk Southern. So what they would do here, they're making large HVAC units, so large air handling equipment. And the two spurs that you see, the way this is set up, so Highway 2, Lincoln Way, is in the bottom right corner of the image. So if you go bottom left. If you go bottom left, that's towards Michigan City, bottom right towards, or upper right towards Kingsbury. There you see Norfolk Southern's Chicago line there in the upper right, the double track main line. So New York blower would bring in covered coil cars of steel to this covered dock in the upper right. And then the spur that curved off that went inside the plant, kind of in center left, that's where they would ship out some of the blowers on flat cars. But again, that was all done. I think they were even done doing the blower business when South Shore took over. They brought some steel in initially, and then they switched all that over to truck. But that's another industry along the Kingsbury Industrial Lead that was active right around the time that I gave this presentation initially. So Laporte Siding, this is just continuing to the south. Lincoln Way is there on the far left of this image. Howmet is the big industry with the white roof, kind of in the upper right. Laporte Siding had been inactive for most of my time at South Shore. I think in 2013, maybe 2014, we reactivated as a place for car storage, which you could see a cut of cars in there for car storage at this time when this aerial photo was taken. But this was just another location along the Kingsbury Industrial Lead, primarily used for car storage. There were no industries there. We didn't have enough property to set up a transload operation there, I don't think. But we just reactivated that siding because the rail was there. We basically put the switches back in service, put some ties in, put some ballast in. That was one thing at South Shore Freight. You know, the freight was almost kind of an afterthought on the main line. So we had to kind of scrabble for freight tracks, freight capacity. The old C&O interchange in Michigan City, we would use for storing cars for GAF when we had to. It wasn't a great move to shove cars up there, up the hill. This was just another place that was close to Michigan City that we could store cars when we were running out of capacity, which we definitely had very limited freight capacity along the railroad. So moving south, this was a funny little industry called HT Aluminum Specialties. Back when the aluminum market was fairly hot, they would bring in scrap aluminum, both from industrial users and aluminum can collectors. So they would consolidate it here, process it, shred it, and load it into box cars to get shipped out to be resmelted at aluminum smelters. So you can see one dock there. We'll see some closer ground level images, but this was a trailing point spur on the north going northbound. So there you can see State Road 4 in the foreground. This building's gone today. It's just a foundation. But this industry would get worked on the return trip going back to Michigan City. I don't think it was ever active. I started in 08 with South Shore, and it was not active at that point. But it was, as I understand it, a very messy industry because they were loading the scrapped aluminum in bulk. So they were literally pushing it in with bucket loaders into boxcars. From what I remember, it was going to a BNSF destination, and BNSF would provide their oldest, rattiest, worst condition boxcars that were kind of on their last legs because this aluminum really tore up the interior lining of these boxcars. So it was kind of like, I imagine it to hide service in the 50s. It's kind of where boxcars go to die. I think this industry and this scrap aluminum service was one of those that where boxcars went to die. So some ground level views, just a couple truck docks and a cinder block addition on the front, with the main industry being just a metal pole building in the back, one boxcar door there that they would index their own cars. I don't know if they ever got more than a couple cars at a time, but yeah, they were literally loading shredded aluminum in bulk into boxcars at this industry. Continuing south, this is Stillwell. So when I gave this presentation in 2011, this was all brand new. This we set up, the interchange had been active. This was between the Grand Trunk and the South Shore, Grand Trunk and the Norfolk Southern, South Shore and CN, whatever railroads you want to call it. But it had been fairly dormant. Over the years, this was a place that had been really active with unit steel trains coming in from Granite City and other places, and going up to industries on the South Shore. So this at one time had handled unit trains. When I started, this industry or this interchange was completely dormant. CN was storing maintenance of way equipment there. When some rules changed with the Transportation Safety Administration with toxic inhalation hazard traffic. So for South Shore, that was mostly chlorine, anhydrous ammonia, a little bit of sulfur dioxide. So going to the co-op in New Carlisle or going to the chemical plant in Kingsbury. So the rules had changed. So you had to have a positive handoff when you were interchanging those commodities. So that meant in Chicago, which was in a high threat urban area. So any interchange within, I think, 20 or 30 miles of the Chicago city limits, you had to have a positive handoff on this traffic, which meant handing paperwork from one crew to another or from a crew to a clerk at a manned interchange. Well, South Shore didn't really have manned interchanges. So what we did is we looked at our system, and Stillwell was the only interchange point we had because the interchange track in South Bend, the switch had been removed by Norfolk Southern, so that wasn't active anymore. So this was our only active interchange outside of the high threat urban area. We could interchange TIH traffic without having a positive handoff. So what we did is worked out a scheme with Canadian National, which was a railroad that was not afraid to move TIH traffic. So we basically tried to get all of our TIH interchange out of Chicago and onto Stillwell. And we did that through rate incentives. This was basically the low cost interchange for South Shore. If you were a customer moving anhydrous ammonia or chlorine, we made it, basically we incentivized this interchange. So there had been one track, we built a second track. So there was a receipt and a delivery track with CN, and there you can see the diamonds there in the bottom of the image. This faces east. So here are some ground level views. Again, these tracks were, the track that the locomotives there on in the center left image was the brand new track that we built. The other track where the tank cars are, that was the existing interchange track. And then you could see there the train working the interchange. So on the southbound trip to Kingsbury, they would pull in, basically run around the cars, tack on, shove out back to their train, which was on the main line, and then continue south. Then on the return trip, when they had empties going back to the CN, they would just tuck those into a track, for CN. But we basically use this as a runaround to get around those cars instead of having to head in and do some other kind of a trick where we would shove them across the CN. There was a runaround track there on the south side at Stillwell. But just a little note, CN had pulled our regular diamonds at the crossing there and had put in an Owl's diamond, which is a flange bearing diamond. So South Shore had a speed restriction put on it, which that kind of happened without our knowledge. But basically so you didn't have those flangeways for the main line. That's the reason they put those in, since our traffic was pretty low density. So immediately south of the diamonds are just out of this image to the left. That's the old nickel plate Grand Trunk interchange track that curves up there to the right. This was a company that when I started was called Finitech, and they were bringing in recycled plastic. So primarily, you know, like, you know, why can't I think of it? Laundry detergent bottles and milk bottles. That was primarily what they were bringing in, and they were melting that down and creating wood decking. So something that the composite decking that you'd use on your back deck instead of wood. This company in this factory actually did that. So they were taking in recycled material that they would get in by truck locally. They would make deck boards and ship that out on center beam flat cars. So the dock that's in the very center of that image that you can kind of see as a light spot there was a boxcar dock that they would ship that out in boxcars. That was all gone by the time I started. It was all done in center beam flat cars. So that was a spot immediately south of the dock where they could get around both sides of the cars with a forklift and load the center beam cars. That was the only thing that was happening there when I started in 08. We were approached by a company called Glycerin Traders that had set up a lease to basically utilize Finitech's track because they were only shipping maybe a car a month, maybe a couple cars a month, pretty low volume. Glycerin Traders wanted to come in and move glycerin that they would get inbound. They would process it and reship it back out. And they were also in the biodiesel market. So they were bringing in some oils, basically everything in tank cars. So pretty low volume stuff. You can see it was a funny little track arrangement because the runaround track doesn't actually tie back into the main line. It ties into the old interchange track, which curved and stub ended at the time with only a couple car lengths of headroom. So when our train would go in there, they would pull into the interchange track for headroom and then switch back into the stub. And then that siding there wasn't usually used for much. But over the years, you'll see in some pictures going forward, this has turned into a neat little operation. The inset picture there of that transformer, that's on these tracks right there at the crossover. That was a picture that I took of a transformer that was brought in for NIPSCO. And they were just looking for a location because the transformer yard that they were going to was only a couple miles away. They came to us and said, hey, where's a track that we can minimize the amount of road miles this transformer has to run on? Find me a track that's as close to this location as possible. This was it. Finitech was willing to do a sublease with NIPSCO to let them use that track. So we brought in this monster transformer and put it in there for NIPSCO to unload and move out. They did it all with hand jacks and timbers. That was a gigantic transformer, which we kind of joked around. And if you're familiar with the cartoon or the movies, Megatron is the bad guy in Transformers. We called this move Megatron. And it basically came in from CN right there at Stillwell. We only moved it, maybe 1,000 feet across the diamonds, put it in there at the track, and got paid pretty handsomely for it. But those transformer moves were always interesting because very heavy, usually wide loads. They required a lot of babysitting, but that was a fun one. And if I'm looking at that picture right, I can see some dirt there to the right of the coupler. I think that was right around the time that Glycerin Traders was demolishing the old boxcar dock so that they'd have room to move more cars. So this is what Glycerin Trader looks like today. It's really blown up since I've left. So the building there with the white roof obviously was not there before. Glycerin Traders has gotten into the feed products market. So I think there's only one tank car in this image. The rest of it are feed cars. So you can see there's a conveyor there that goes under the car. There's also a dump pit that goes into the leg, which goes into the building. So they've got 2 car spots here for moving feed products. When I was there, if you go to that website, glycerintraders.com, they've got some fantastic videos that show how they were transloading this product when I was there and now how they do it today. They literally were using a little conveyor that they would tuck under the car, under the outlet gates, with a farm tractor and a power takeoff that they would power that conveyor, and they would just go direct into truck. So they would back the truck up, get that conveyor going, open up the gravity gate on the hopper, pour the feed out into the truck, and away it went. And they would also move the cars with that same tractor, hook chains up, pull those cars down. But you can see here, they extended the spur to the south, built the building, they've really done a lot with what started out with pretty humble beginnings. So they were great people to work with, fantastic workers. Yeah, always enjoyed working with folks at Glycerin Traders. So it's neat to see an industry that you helped get started really grow and be successful. So now we're moving to the end of the line. So this is the Kingsbury Industrial Park that originally was built as an ordnance plant, but the orange line here is basically the tracks that were active in 2011. There are more that are active today, but South Shore came in the upper right on the old Wabash, turned in on a track that was built by the Wabash as a secondary access point. Their original access had been through this Y in the upper right corner. Those tracks were being decommissioned at the time, so they built a new entrance into the park, tied into the original Kingsbury Ordnance Plant track that was built during World War II, went along Hupp Road. And then there was 3 industries there when I was there: Prairie Packaging, Roll Coater, which became Precoat Metals, and then Alexander Chemical at the end. So that's the locations of all these industries that we're looking at. The orange line is the only active track that was there in 2011. What's here, all of these buildings that kind of look like they have white roofs, this, we'll see some images later, but that became active by a customer that started right after I left. I had originally started negotiating with them to put in some car storage there, and they started up after I left. But these are some neat historic images from the USGS. If you go onto their Earth Explorer website, you can see some historic aerials. But Kingsbury Ordnance Plant was built during World War II, started in 1940 when the war clouds were on the horizon. Put here because of the access to 5 railroads. This is the Grand Trunk was here, the Wabash was here, the B&O was here, and the Nickel Plate was here. So maybe it's 4, not 5. But put in a location, 13,000 acres, had a lot of access to water, which you need for manufacturing of explosives. It was also in a location that could just as easily go east as west, because we were planning on fighting a 2-front war in both Europe and in the Pacific. So there were a lot of places like this in Illinois, Wisconsin, Missouri, Kansas, where these ordnance plants popped up. Kingsbury was one that, and they built, they made the powder, they made the explosives, Torpex, gunpowder that went in. Then they actually made the bullets and casings themselves. They made the shells. Everything was made here from, input elements to full ordnance on the way out. And they made everything from artillery shells to aerial drop, depth charges, bombs, all kinds of stuff. It was a pretty amazing plant. And the Laporte Historical Society has a lot of information about this plant if you're ever interested. These are some more oblique aerials that were taken, but you can see in the construction of the plant, if you look on the far left, these were all igloos for the storage of finished munitions. So when you had explosives, they were all spread out, covered with earth. Most of those buildings are still there today. But if you ever had an explosive event from handling them, you would limit the potential sympathetic destination or detonation of other ordnance by doing that. So everything was spread out. You can see by looking at the plants, locations where they were actually making and storing explosives were all spread out. The way these buildings were constructed they were built to explode up and out. So the roofs were built very weak. The walls were built very strong. So if an explosive event happened, the explosion would be contained and wouldn't cause a trigger or a daisy chain reaction in the plant. But that's why everything is so spread out. But there was an incredible amount of railroad infrastructure that was built in this place. You had a lot of single car spots all along these assembly lines. You had non-explosive storage in some of these buildings that are closer together up at the top. But yeah, you can see where the explosives were being made, everything's spread out. So that's kind of the basis or the foundation for this. So in the 50s, the Korean War was the last time this plant was used. Maybe it was reactivated again during Vietnam, I'm not sure. But by the 70s, it was pretty much vacant, and some industries had come in and took over. This is some of the operations. These are some photos that I took of some South Shore freight crews switching in the plant. Obviously, a lot of covered coil cars. Those were all going into roll coater. I'll talk about them later. tank cars were all going into Alexander Chemical, except in these two photos with the crewman riding on the car. That was a carload of sulfuric acid that was going into Prairie Packaging. They were a company that I think was very short-lived. They both came and went when I was there, but I'll talk about them as well. This train that you see in the middle was the first carload that was going into that industry. And that track, I don't think had seen a freight car since the 1950s. And, you know, the industry rehabbed it, put it back in service. It was incredibly light rail. It was 50 or 60 pound rail. We ended up having a derailment there at one point later on when we were switching some other companies, customers' cars in there, and one of those really light rails rolled over. But you can see the old, you know, ordnance plant buildings there. This is on the lead going back to Alexander Chemical. But yeah, you can see the weeds here, you know, train in the cornfield, you know, was a place that they've got a lot of hopes for on the economic development front, but not a lot had happened there since the 70s. So here's the first industry. This is Prairie Packaging. We're looking at this from the north, south is to the top. This was that old spur that I mentioned that they put back in service. Hadn't seen a train in a few decades. Basically, the industry there was, they were bringing in sulfuric acid and they were making golf course fertilizer. So they were breaking that down into its base elements to make sulfur fertilizer for golf courses. So this is the plant. Very photogenic, beautiful little old boxcar dock there that obviously wasn't going to be used. There were two spur tracks in there and a loading dock. I want to see, yep, I do have a closer image. So yeah, this is just kind of the gate there. The funny thing about this gate, you can see it's a rolling gate. So when the truck gate was open, that gate rolled across the tracks. So we had to put something in place that our guys could come in and basically turn the power off to the gate. Because if we were switching on the railroad side, which we would just open up the gate, it was a swing gate. But if a trucker came in and wanted to open it up, that gate would roll right into our train or right across the tracks. So we had to put a cutout there where literally crewmen would walk up, turn the power off to the gate. We would do our switching. We'd put the power back on the gate, away we would go. You can see right above the sign there, there's an electric line that kind of goes across. When we first went to bring that very first car in, you can't see it there in those images, but when we first went to bring the first car in, that wire, they weren't worried about railroad cars. They hadn't seen one in a decade. That wire was actually hanging down too low. And as we were rolling in, the crew was looking up, not just looking down, thankfully. They were being pretty conscientious, and they noticed that that line was going to hit the tank car. So dumped the air on the train, got stopped. Two guys from the plant came out with a 2x4 nailed end to end, and they literally held that electric line up so our crew could come in, do our switching, get that car in there and left. They raised that line on a more permanent basis going forward, but just the fun things you have when you start a new customer up. So this is that first car going in. You can't quite see it because the resolution is not high enough, but there is a guy back there holding that electric line up while our crew did the switching. But they literally just had a boxcar door here. They would bring a hose out from the line, hook it up to the car, and unload it into their process line there at Prairie Packaging. Next industry was roll coater. So this was one of the original industries that took over part of the ordnance plant when it was decommissioned. And their primary industry was steel processing. That's what they did. But they also did painting. So this was a great industry for the railroad where it was loads in and loads out. Not the volume on the outbound side that we saw on the inbound side, but they would bring in coiled steel in coil cars and basically process it, trim it, paint it, and then some of those coils went back out again. At the time, Menards was a big customer of theirs for window well linings, is what they were primarily making, that they were shipping out by rail. So the plant you can see here, again, we're facing south, Hupp Road's at the bottom. You had a big track that kind of made a big bubble out from the main line there and went into the plant. You'll see, I'll show some ground level pictures, but basically South Shore would put their cars out on the main line. They would come out with the trackmobile, grab their cars and run them through the plant. So here's a little closer up view. This is showing where South Shore would leave the cars for them. So they would come out, the trackmobile sat inside the plant. They would back that trackmobile up to the upper right, come down, grab their cars, usually 2 or 3 at a time, back up to clear the switch, run them into the plant, take the lids off, pull the coils out, put them into their coil storage area, put the lids back on, and then they would shove those coils out to the bottom left and leave those coils either down on the lead or just right down here on their spur just across Hupp Road. So the way what you're looking at here in this image, this is where South Shore has left all the inbound cars. Not sure if these are loads or empties, but that's what we would spot there. And they would basically grab them, run them through the plant, and then leave them down either east of the switch or on their spur, depending on how many they had. This is a view of the building from Hupp Road. This is kind of so you had 2 truck doors there and a rail door. Then, that was in the ordnance plant. Those were some of the towers and things that they had for processing. But basically, this building inside was big craneways, for processing coils. This is a view from the west, looking back at the plant. Cars that South Shore had left are out there on what I call the main line or the industrial lead. So they would come out with their trackmobile from their spur there on the right, go past the switch, reach up, grab those cars, run them through the plant. These are just some cars that were left there that day. They were bringing in coils from an NS served mill, apparently, because they were all NS cars, even though that last one has CSX covers on it. So, they would bring in coils. Sometimes they would, when they were shipping steel coils out, we would try to provide them South Shore covered coil cars. But sometimes if we didn't have enough coil cars, or if all of our empties were going to the steel mill at Burns Harbor, we would let them reload the inbound cars. So we would contact the car's owner. Hey, is it okay if we reload these cars going to this destination? They would usually tell us yes. We would give roll coat or pre-coat permission to reload those cars on the way out. But oftentimes the cars that came in loaded would go out empty. We would give them empty CSS cars that they would load for the outbound side, because if our cars were just sitting around, we'd rather have them loaded than have them load that foreign road car, which isn't exactly terribly efficient. This is just a picture, I'm not sure why this is in there, of the track condition there at the west end switch of roll coater. Here's the other side of the inbound truck, 2 truck doors there, rail door on the left. Here's a picture that I took inside the plant. That's their trackmobile. They could unload 2 cars at a time with their overhead crane there. I think those were actually 2 CSS cars that were empty to be spotted in there to get loaded up. And these are the types of coils that they were moving there in the foreground. So I assume those are painted coils going out wrapped. Mostly what they would get in would not have been wrapped. But yeah, that's the size of coils that they'd be dealing with. Usually, 20,000 pound or 40,000 pound coils. So these are big. This is a little snippet from their website, their capabilities, what they could bring in. So 72-inch wide steel, minimum of 2 feet, maximum coil weight there, 50,000 pounds. So yeah, they were bringing these in. This is basically what they were advertising in 2011 as their capabilities for roll coater. The image that I have here, these are the CSS 1650 series cars. This is where these cars went to die. Basically, these cars did not have insulated hoods. So in modern day covered coil cars, most of them have insulation, because you don't want those coils changing temperature real fast, because they'll get condensation on them and they'll rust. And most coil car customers, most steel customers, they don't want surface rust on their coils. So most everything that was moving on South Shore was moving in our insulated covered coil cars, in the 2100 series and a couple other series that we had. So at some point, Burns Harbor told us, we won't load outbound coils in these cars anymore. So these covered coil cars, which you can see their condition, they were built in the 60s, they were pretty ratty. Pre-coat / roll coater was the last customer that would load outbound coils in these. And the reason was they were shipping painted coils. So they weren't worried about the coils rusting. So we would bring down these 1650 cars. They were not great equipment, but at some point they even got to the point where they said, we want insulated covers for our cars. We don't want to load the 1650s anymore. So we pulled the lids off them, scrapped the lids, and basically turned those into open top trough gondolas for unfinished coils that would ship out. So that's where those cars finished their lives, was in unfinished coil service out of the ArcelorMittal steel mill at Burns Harbor. But their last covered coil business was going down there to Precoat Metals, and they were the only customer that would use those cars as you see it in those pictures. So again, like I mentioned, inbound cars would come primarily in NS, CSX, maybe some BNSF or UP cars every once in a while, but a lot of the outbound steel was moving in CSX cars. So now moving to the last industry on the line, this is Alexander Chemical, and they made basically water treatment chemicals. So they would get in chemicals, mix them, sell them to primarily municipalities that were making or that were purifying water for us to all use. So this is water purification chemicals. Got a couple pictures here. Kind of this was before and after. They did some track rehab work in the plant. Here you can see most of the tracks along the buildings. So it comes in from the South Shore on the bottom right and basically stubs out at that driveway in the upper left. And there's tank cars in there, but it's pretty much grass. Well, they did a rehab project in there and brought their track up to better standards, knowing the chemicals that they were handling in there. You really want to operate on good track. And then here in the bottom right, there was almost an interchange track that was set up. So they had a fence that was basically for plant security, and South Shore we wouldn't spot the cars in the plant. They did that themselves with the trackmobile. We would spot the cars down here on these two tracks, or sometimes farther down on the lead, and they would come outside of the fence, get them, bring them into the plant. We very rarely went inside the fence to deliver cars. This was a snippet that I took from their website, so you can see the inbound products that we were carrying. They're all listed right there, primarily TIH chemicals. So this was stuff that would come in sometimes over Chicago, but a lot of times by the time it was done, this would come in at Stillwell, and we would just move the cars, the 6 or 7 miles to Alexander Chemical. But you can see there kind of the menu of chemicals that we were bringing to them. This is kind of from the farthest north along Hupp Road going towards the plant. So this is the lead that went into the plant along the old ordnance plant buildings with the boxcar docks here that hadn't been used in decades. You can see the wavy rail there heading out, tank car in the distance. Then leapfrogging ahead past that tank car. This is basically where South Shore would do our switching. We would leave their cars right outside the fence on one of these two tracks, pull the empties. Ideally, if there weren't enough cars, we would spot on one, pull from the other. Sometimes if there were too many, we'd either have to go in, reach into the plant, or the cars would be, farther down the lead. So we'd have to go in there, to spot the loads. But this is the basic setup. From a railroading standpoint, it was almost like an interchange with another railroad on these two tracks because we never went into the plant to do any spotting. Here are some photos I took inside the plant. Basically, the tracks were always jammed up. They had 4 or 5 different places where they would unload cars. They would move them around with their trackmobile. We would just kind of, either put the cars right outside the gate or shove the cars in if there were too many, if we had to do our runaround move. But yeah, you can see there, everything would come in by rail and go out by truck. You can see some chlorine cylinders there in the background. That's how a lot of these municipalities were receiving their chemicals. This is just kind of me moving over a little bit, but you can see 3 tracks in there. 2 tracks went long ways. Actually, the track on the immediately left, on the track on the immediate right, were really short stubs. Then there was another switch past that unloading rack where it went into 2 long tracks back in there. But there were usually a dozen or so cars in that facility at any one time. This is just a photo back down the lead where we had spotted some cars. Must not have had any empties to pull, so we just left them down on the lead and left for the day. So they'd had to come out, pull those cars in with their trackmobiles to start unloading. So this was this is the next. This was the industry that I mentioned that started up right after I had left South Shore. That was basically a car storage, and they've since developed into a car disassembly, car repair industry. But they went in and rehabbed the big loop of track all the way around these old ordnance plant buildings, which had been inactive for decades. put in ties, put in ballast, basically brought all these tracks back into service. And then up here in the upper right corner, they've also started doing some rail car dismantling services as well. That link on the bottom, it's a fairly short link, but if you go, they have a great YouTube video, the industry does, of their operation. It's got drone footage that shows them, lots of cars stored along Hupp Road, which is here at the bottom, as well as some freight car dismantling that they're doing up there. So I haven't really talked about operations a lot, but when I was there, we were going to Kingsbury twice a week on Tuesday and Thursday with the AF2 7 a.m. job. So they would kind of sort their cars together there in Carroll Avenue Yard on Tuesday and Thursday, head south to Kingsbury Monday, Wednesday, Friday. They were doing the old the industries that were on Amtrak on the kind of downtown Michigan City, and then they were going east to New Carlisle. So they do that Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then they would go to Kingsbury on Tuesday, Thursday, which was usually an all-day deal. But yeah, this industry, as I understand it, I think they've gone to 5-day-a-week service on that Kingsbury job because of traffic that's been developed at Hickman Williams, which I mentioned earlier, and this new industry for car storage down at Kingsbury. As I understand it, I don't know exactly, this is third person, but I think they set this up, like I mentioned, where it's kind of an interchange track with the industry, where South Shore will spot cars down here on one of 2 tracks along Hupp Road, and then they'll pull outbound cars from the same. They don't do any spotting inside the plant. But I know that they move some huge cuts of cars, like frac sand cars that they move down here, where it's a whole unit train. And so they've got to put a locomotive on each end, run down here, shove the cars in there, and do the same operation reverse to pull them out. Because the interchange track at Dillon, which I don't have on here in this description, but it's at the very stub end of the line on the old nickel plate. I think it was only about room for maybe 20 or 25 cars. So if you got more cars than that, you had to do a double-ended operation where you put a locomotive on both ends because you have to run around at one point or the other. So kind of getting to wrap up and ready to take questions. But this is kind of the route that we've gone over. Dillon that I just mentioned is in that bottom right corner. There was a diamond there originally between the nickel plate and the Wabash. That diamond got taken out sometime when I was at South Shore and it was laying in the weeds, but we just used that connection track and the runaround down there at Dillon. So the crew would make a long shove-in move when they arrived. And then when they pulled back out of Kingsbury, then they would run around their train to go back north. So that was one part of the operation that I didn't see. But anyway, that is kind of, the entire, got to make a plug for this. So first and the fastest, the Shoreline Historical Society, their current issue has a great feature written by my friend and old boss, Andrew Fox, who is president of South Shore Freight. So he wrote up an article with photos by Mike Rea, and Norm Carlson did the captions. And it's in the first and fastest, the current issue, winter 2021. This is the cover image from it. Got to put in a plug for it. Fantastic article. And it really covers the entire South Shore, but gives a lot of details about operations, about customers, what they do today. Looking at these locomotives, our locomotives didn't have air conditioning or PTC on them when I left. That's all kind of strange when I look at these locomotives to see all that stuff up on the roof. But if you can, if you're not a member, I highly recommend this issue if you're interested in South Shore Freight. Very well done, extensive article. And the cover picture is a photo of a train on the Kingsbury line with a whole bunch of cars going south to go into storage at Kingsbury at that industry that I just talked about. So, you see there, they've got 4 units. We usually went down there with 2, usually didn't need more than 1, unless there were leaves on the rails in the fall. But fantastic article by Andrew Fox in the latest First and Fastest that I got to give a plug to. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
I've muted everybody, so you'll need to unmute to ask questions. But Andy, thanks. That was a wonderful presentation. Very enjoyable.
Appreciate it. Like I said, not a lot of train pictures in there, but yeah, it was more focused on the industries. My interest being in the marketing and sales world has always been what's in those freight cars and what makes them go. So
absolutely. Yeah. Good stuff.
Yeah. Fascinating presentation. Thank you, Andy.
Thanks, Neil.
What's your current railroad?
So I work for Trevero, which is a company that owns the Cedar Rapids and Iowa City Railway. So my paycheck comes from the Krandic. Don't do a ton of railroad work these days, involved in some, but we've got a barge terminal, we've got some warehouses, we've got some other trucking logistics operations. So I'm doing business development for the company that owns the Krandic, and I'm here in Madison, Wisconsin. That's where I'm located today.
Yeah, okay.
I very much enjoy the presentation because it has to do with the customers and what the customers are doing. I spent a number of years working in industry, and one of the industries that I was involved with was a steel industry, and they did do coils, and they did finished coils, and they did, you know, just all kinds of work with steel products. And so the coil part was very interesting to me.
Yep. Yeah, and it's one of those industries that, you know, your loads in and loads out, and a lot of times people just think, well, you just reload the car, of course. Well, South Shore had a fleet of covered coil cars, and if they were sitting around, we wanted them out moving and earning car hire on those other railroads. Because I don't know if everybody knows this, but you know, when your freight car is on another railroad, they're paying you rent. When theirs are on your railroad, you're paying them rent. And that was the system that was set up after the Civil War, because back then, every railroad that interchanged, you were taking that freight out of that boxcar and putting it in another boxcar. So your boxcars never left your railroad, and the railroads just understood the inefficiency of that. Just said, all right, I'm going to put it, the industry is going to put it in my car. We're just going to keep it in my car all the way till it gets to destination. But you get to pay me rent because now you don't have to buy a car at destination railroad. So it's a good setup, but it's kind of counterintuitive that you're paying other railroads to rent their freight car while they're on your railroad. So yeah, at South Shore, we had a pretty big fleet of cars, and we wanted them offline as much as possible, earning revenue for us. So
I have some history with the South Shore, not personal, but my dad worked for the South Shore in 46 and 47. He built his first house on Risky Avenue, a couple blocks off of Michigan Street. And then my grandparents lived on Carroll Avenue, right off Michigan. And my other grandparents lived on Harding, right off of Michigan Street. And then I had a girlfriend at 11th and Michigan, and her dad worked at the shops in South Shore. So
yeah, I think it's one of those funny places. If you lived in Michigan City, you knew somebody,
oh yeah,
or you were related to people who worked at South Shore. You know, between NICD and South Shore Freight, that's several hundred people, and over a long period of time, a lot of people there. And I'll be honest, that was the best job I've ever had. I loved working for the South Shore. Great family oriented, just had a great feel to it. And, you know, a lot of people didn't know this when I first went to work there. NIPSCO was a majority owner of South Shore. NIPSCO owned us. And Anacostia and Pacific, who's the parent company, they bought out NIPSCO's share when I worked there, and basically became the sole owner of South Shore. But it was really insulated from a lot of kind of some of the ugliness that was in the railroad industry. And for me, it was a great place to start my railroading career because, like I said, I got a chance to, you know, work as a trainman dozens and dozens of times in horrible weather, in great conditions, you know, riding freight cars, tying handbrakes, learning what railroading was all about, that a lot of marketing and sales people don't get that opportunity. And today, with the rules that the FRA has, you'd never get that opportunity today. They don't let commercial people go out and work as a trainman. I mean, you can ride along with the crew, but you don't get to get out of the locomotive. You sit there and you watch. You don't get to participate. So at the time, it was a perfect opportunity for me. It was great. Yeah, absolutely love my time at South Shore.
My dad often thought about why he didn't stay with the South Shore, because he only worked for him for 2 years. He went on to be an expediter at Joy Manufacturing. But he has his buddy from school stayed with the South Shore and retired from them.
Yep.
So.
Joe, and you get that lovely railroad retirement, which is a heck of a benefit.
Joe posted a chat note, a question for you. When did South Shore take over the Kingsbury line?
You know, that's not a date I have in my head, but I think it was in the early 2000s. I don't know that off the top of my head. Something about me wants to say 2002 or 2004, but I'm not sure exactly. I know they got the Port of Chicago in the late 90s. And then I think the Kingsbury line was just after that. So early 2000s, but I don't know exactly. I'm sure the internet could give an answer. Unfortunately, having worked for 3 railroads since then, I've replaced a lot of my South Shore knowledge with other things. You know, as you pour knowledge in the top, other knowledge falls out the bottom. So I've forgotten some of those things, unfortunately.
Does Crandix still have a red brick office building on a main road in Cedar Rapids?
It does not. So the
Okay.
Iowa Northern actually used to have a downtown Cedar Rapids office, but they even moved out. There used to be 3 short lines headquartered in Cedar Rapids. It was the Iowa Northern, the Crandix, and the Iowa Interstate, and I've now worked for 2 of them. But Crandix's office is at Rockford Road. They just built a brand new office at their shop facility. They just moved into it about 1.5 years ago, right before COVID hit. Beautiful facility, but they hadn't been in the brick building. Even the parent company, our Trevero offices, were on 12th Street, Wilson Ave. And they've actually just moved, Trevero just moved into our new warehouse that we built, which is out of town in Fairfax, but still on the Crandix. And we basically built a customer for ourselves. Trevero built a warehouse that's served by the Crandix, but they don't have that brick office building anymore.
Okay. The reason I was asking, from 2004 to 2009, I went to Iowa almost every month. And I remember at some point they parked the passenger train in front of that office in an area that before 2009, they ripped up that particular track. And I don't know what happened to the passenger train that was there, but
Interesting. Yeah, I'm not familiar with it.
it was on just east of 380. You'd go, there was a main road that went, or just west of 380. Main road went west and then curved north. And then after it curved north, it was on the left.
Yeah.
I can't remember the name of the road right now.
Interesting. Nope, I'm not familiar with it.
This would sure make, Andy, this would sure make a great model railroad. Maybe Bob Blake size, but I know
Well,
it wouldn't fit
yeah,
in my basement.
Yeah, there's not a lot of, I'll be honest, there's not a lot of, branch lines of this size. For me, it's a way to model, if you wanted to, it's a way to model South Shore without modeling Canton. A lot of people like the passenger trains. You could still have them, up at Carroll Ave, but it's where South Shore kind of operates like a regular freight railroad. Everywhere else, they're scurrying to get out of the way of the passenger trains. Here, it was just us. You've got an interchange with a Class 1 railroad. You cross at Diamonds a couple times between NICD, Norfolk Southern, and CN. You got a big industrial park. You got a couple little, one-spot industries along the way. Yeah, it's a cool branch line. And a lot of history along that line too. When you think about unit steel trains, running up and down there, and now today with those unit storage cars going in and out, you got some pretty heavy-duty railroading. But there are also days when you've got 2 locomotives and 2 freight cars. So yeah, it's a cool operation with some cool industries, especially GAF. GAF's another one of those. When a customer is asking for specific cars to specific tracks, you've got 3 different commodities between the asphalt, the granules, and the shingles being shipped. It's a cool plant, and it's an ancient plant. It's when you're on the ground looking at it, that is not a modern plant by any means. So yeah, there's some cool opportunities there.
There's some sections of this that, you could do a smaller shelf layout, with 2 or 3 of the industries and have, plenty of switching value there.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, GAF alone could be a layout. I mean, if you have a small switching layout, I've got a buddy who actually has kind of taken GAF as a prototype and put that in on his layout. And he has, all the specific colors are there on his waybills. He's got black, gray, green, and, they order that specific color in. So you got to go in, all the cars that are sitting outside the plant, you need all the green ones today. And that's exactly how our crew worked. So it was pretty cool.
There's some companies that have made some South Shore coil cars over time.
Mm-hmm.
I know a few years ago, I picked up, I think, 6 of them when they came out, all 6 road numbers, just to have some variety of coil cars for my area of Van Ness. So
Yep.
it's kind of cool.
Yeah, I worked with Atlas. When they came out with those, I had actually reached out to Atlas and said, hey, because I wanted them for Christmas gifts for my customers, because we had done locomotives with Atlas and had given those out to employees and customers, and they were received so well. I would see them on my customers' desks when I would go out to visit them. And I said, you know, the locomotive is great, but I want a freight car. You know, freight car is where the action is. And so I had contacted Atlas when they came out with that model, and it wasn't exact, but it was real close. And so went out, took all these detailed photos of one of the cars in our yard, and they produced them for us. And, you know, I basically said to them, you know, you can produce them commercially. I want whatever the number was, 250 of them for employees and customers. And yeah, they released them. I think they've done 2 runs with them now. So yeah, it's a very cool car that I was definitely involved in that project up to my elbows. So, but the folks at Atlas were great to work with, both on the locomotives and on the. I think we did 2 runs. We did the old scheme, the South Shore line scheme. Then we did the South Shore freight with the silver pilots and the black anti-skid when I was there. And then we did those coil cars. So, yep, it was just neat to go out. You know, you always wanted to have reminders to your customers of the railroad. And, you know, so a lot of people would do paperweights or golf shirts or hats. I wanted something that somebody would think was a unique gift and would sit on their desk and remind them of South Shore every day, because I wanted them thinking about us. So yeah, those models were really cool.
Cool idea.
You've got another
Oh.
chat question, Andy.
All right. Well, I do a similar presentation on the Krandic. And Krandic electric locomotives. So Krandic does not have electric locomotives anymore. So oddly enough, that's a funny thing. So I've worked for 2 companies that started as electric utility owned interurbans and have cult followings. The Krandic and the South Shore, both cult followings, originally interurbans, now kind of high density freight railroads. So the Krandic doesn't have electric anymore. And oddly enough, the customer that started the Krandic, what is now the Alliant Energy, was the Iowa Power and Light electric generating station, it is switching away from coal. South Shore is seeing this in their future as well. Their NIPSCO generating stations, one of them is already closed. One is going to switch away from coal. The Cedar Rapids plant is the same way. As utilities are switching away from coal, these coal railroads are losing those customers. So South Shore is losing its steam coal. The Krandic is losing its steam coal from its parent company. And so they've gone all diesel and have been for a long time. I think even since the 50s or 60s, which the South Shore stayed electrified after that. But the Krandic, we just changed the paint scheme on the Krandic. So for years, it was this Iowa State red and yellow. And we just moved to this black and green, like our corporate colors are at Trevero. So they use these XD 1500s, and they're I think it's Progress locomotive, but they're a one of a kind. Krandic is the only railroad that has them. They're mother slug sets. And yeah, we also have some SW 1500s, some SW 1000s, but it's all switchers at Krandic. I'm probably not the expert on Krandic that I am on the South Shore, and you know, I'm probably losing that. So I don't know that I do a presentation on that. I'd have to do a lot of research because my day-to-day is not Krandic. So probably not the expert that you guys need.
Well, once again, thanks, Andy. Great presentation, really informative, and I'm sure everybody enjoyed it. I certainly did. Are there any other questions for Andy? All right. Well, we really appreciate you spending time with us today and sharing your expertise. This was recorded. I hope you don't mind me posting this to our YouTube site, and I'll publicize that. So we usually get we had about 15 on here today, and we'll probably have another 15 or so watch it in the recorded version. So if I get any comments, I'll forward those on to you, Andy, or any questions on the YouTube.
Yeah, I think my only request would be, you know, our discussion in the beginning, crop it off so it starts where I kind of kick off.
Yeah, absolutely will. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I'll be honest, like I mentioned to you, Greg, I really enjoy the presentations you guys put up. The one this week from Seth on Michigan City, I was fascinated by. You guys have got some great content. I subscribe to your YouTube channel. I watch them all. So enjoy it.
Alright.
Happy to have been here. Good seeing the familiar faces. Good meeting you guys that I've never met.
Great. Thanks very much. Thanks,
a great
everybody.
day.
Have a great weekend and happy holidays. We'll see you in January.
Yeah, Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry
Yep,
Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Bye-bye.
Merry Christmas.
Thanks, Andy. Bye-bye.